Isometric training is one of the fastest, easiest, most efficient, and most direct methods for building strength and muscle. And this is because it really helps you build a strong stimulus very quickly and easily while reducing the amount of stress that you have that inhibits your adaptation. However, the simplicity and ease of isometrics is also one of its biggest downfalls. This fast adaptation also means that you can hit a plateau faster, and it's not just a physiological plateau, but an emotional and mental plateau resulting in burnout. So in today's video, I'm going to share with you my top tips on how to avoid and overcome isometrics burnout to keep the process moving and keep you getting results. The first strategy is one of the simplest, which is using different amounts of time for your holds. A lot of the times with isometrics, people get kind of focused on a particular hold, be it 6 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, and so on. And even though you're using a lot of tension for all holds, you don't really need to necessarily balance volume and intensity with isometrics as you do with dynamic training. There still is that mental tendency to kind of pace yourself with longer holds and put more intensity into shorter holds. So if you're used to doing longer holds, 20, 30 seconds, put in some more of the shorter durations, roughly half of what you usually do, to focus on strength. But on the other hand, if you're going for shorter durations and focusing on strength, see what happens when you go for something that's twice as long for creating a stimulus that keeps things spicy and interesting. Strategy number 2 is a little bit unusual, which is mixing up both overcoming and yielding isometric techniques. Now, usually with overcoming isometrics, which is what we practice here at RDP, we're pushing and pulling against an immovable object like a nylon strap or a chain, like with an iso chain. And that's great because it has lots of big advantages. But yielding isometrics hit the nervous system in a different way and can really help you push yourself to a high work capacity if you're trying to stimulate muscle growth. So if you're doing, say, for example, an overhead overcoming isometric with a bar and chain, then try doing it with holding a handstand or just holding a couple of dumbbells at roughly the same position, and it's sure to spark some new interest in your nervous system. Strategy number 3 is to change your muscle length. There was a recent research out about building up the hamstrings that showed that overcoming and isometrics can be just as effective as dynamic training. One of the interesting things about that study was that they practiced using longer muscle lengths. Think of like deep length of a Romanian deadlift, for example. So like with holding for a particular amount of time, people often find that they hold a particular muscle length or position for most of their exercises. So going shorter, going with a longer muscle length, or anywhere in between is going to spark some new growth and keep things interesting for you, even if you're doing the same exercise. The next strategy is one that I like to do with both isometric and dynamic training to kind of liven things up, which is that if you focus a lot on doing compound movements with multiple joints and big muscle groups, spend a workout or two focusing a bit more on single joint stuff, bicep curls, tricep extensions, sissy squats, that sort of thing. And while isometrics can sometimes be a little bit more difficult for single joint stuff, like holding a chest fly can be a little bit difficult with overcoming isometrics, might be a little better with yielding isometrics, going from one to the other can really spark some new interest into your muscles. So if you're used to compound, focus a little bit more on isometric style single joint training. And if you're used to doing a lot of single joint training, focus more on compound stuff, especially with isometrics. Focusing on getting those muscles engaged with the inclusion of the other muscles can really make things at a higher level. The next strategy might not sit well with some isometric purists, but it can be a lot of fun to mix isometric and dynamic training together. Just as adding isometrics can really spark new growth and development with dynamic training, adding dynamic can spark new growth and interest in isometric training. One of the strategies that I like to use with this is use the isometrics for short durations, very intense holds for focusing on strength, and then go with something of a higher rep caliber when it comes to the dynamic stuff to focus on endurance and hypertrophy. The next strategy works a lot better for a programmable, quantifiable unit like the IsoMax, where you can measure your max, your average, and just roughly how much load you have in load or time time settings. And this is because a lot of times isometrics can get really stale and you can burn out because you don't have that metric to go off of. And while having a quantifiable metric by itself doesn't automatically prevent you from plateaus or burnout, going after a particular number can. So with an IsoMax, if you set a high number for a max and you're just trying to get one single beep during an all-out intense hold, then that can really push you to a higher level for strength. Or when it comes to time, you can have a much more quantifiable amount of time at a given load in time mode, and that way you're not just holding on and waiting for the clock to tick down, but you're ramping up how much force you're forcing yourself to produce for that 20, 30 seconds or so on. Changing environments is another way that you can keep things interesting, because the great thing about isometric training is you can do it most anywhere that you have a piece of equipment or even something that you can push against. So go outside, get into a different place, time of day that you're working out. Just changing up the routine can go a long way at giving your nervous system some new stimulus. Even if you're doing the same routines and the same workouts, getting into a different environment can make it a little bit more interesting. And then finally, if you are used to using full body routines with Isometrics, which is easy to do because you only need a handful of exercises, then go more into a split routine. And vice versa, if you're into split training, go full body. And this is a lot easier than you may realize, because a lot of times with full body isometrics, you don't need 20 different exercises. Something like the Promethean method from the Ultimate Isometrics manual, where you have deadlift, overhead press, and curls, hits more muscle than you think it does, so it gets the entire body with 3 exercises. But on the other hand, if you're into split training, then you can shift where you've got like push day, pull day, and squat day. So for a push day, you can have an overhead press, you can have a chest press, and you can have a tricep press, and that way you're getting all of your push chain muscles, some isometric single joint stuff, some compound stuff, and it can breathe some new life and a lot more intensity into the muscles that may be feeling a little bit stale with the old full body routine, or vice versa. The most important thing is don't shoehorn yourself into a dogmatic ideology that there's one correct way to approach your isometric training. There's loads of variations and ways that you can do it, and as long as you're still achieving the fundamental stimulus you're after of high tension for strength, more time for endurance, or challenging your work capacity for building muscle, you're still going to get the same results. You're not going to lose anything out. You're probably even going to move the needle forward and get better results from it. So have fun. Use some of these strategies however you like, and keep your training interesting, because the last thing we want to do is make it feel really boring, mundane, and then motivation starts to dive down and your training goes along with it. Best of luck in your workouts this week. What are some of your ways that you've made isometrics a little bit more interesting? Love to hear you down below in the comments section. Be fit and live free.